My name's Dave Opdahl, and welcome to Falcon Financial Group. Today we're going to spend a little bit of time taking a look at a Business Central concept called default dimensions. So this is kind of an extension of the use of dimensions, but in a way that provides some simplicity of data entry, some consistency of data, especially as it relates to dimensions and transactions, and the utilization of those values, and can also, within the context of general ledger accounts, act as posting restrictions. And so we're going to take a look at that as well as we get into this. So let's just take a step back for a moment. Let's just talk about what defaults are. When we're talking about Business Central, and Business Central comes up with a term that says default something, right? Default dimensions. Default just about anything, right? Anything that's a default tends to be more of a recommendation. In other words, 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to use this, but it could be modified. So when we're talking about default dimensions, we're going to see that there are ways of creating restrictions here, ways of creating consistency, and yet ways to allow that to be kind of flexible so that it's not a hard and fast rule. It can be a hard and fast rule, but it can also be flexible. So keep that in mind. We're going to take a look at that as we go through. But the key is really here we are looking for consistency of data. Whenever you're talking about dimensions, you want these to be really consistent. And so default dimensions are a great tool for ensuring that. So let's dive in, take a look. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick on vendors, because vendors, it's a universal concept. And so I'm looking at a Cronus database here, and we're going to go and look at Fabricam. So one of the things that you will always notice when you open a vendor or a customer or any card related to a master record. And again, when I'm talking about master records, GL accounts, customers, vendors, items, fixed assets, bank accounts, anything that is like a really core number-focused record. In other words, that number is a distinct number, the number field. Excuse me. So when we get to any of these, you're going to notice that the vendor card has a vendor menu. The customer card has a customer menu, so on and so forth. And so that's where we want to go first. And then we're going to look at dimensions. So we're going to go from vendor, dimensions. And so now we have, lo and behold, the default dimensions page for this one particular vendor. And so we have a couple of examples already set up. So let's just kind of walk through it. Now notice, if I do a drop down here, and it will slowly return, here we go. There are quite a few dimensions available to us, and we're not using all of them because we don't necessarily have to. It's only those places where we want to gain some consistency or some control. So in this case, we have area. So notice that you're able to identify the dimension code. Okay, you can only have a dimension code in the list once. So in other words, I couldn't do a second line here for area. So I have my area code set. I have a default value of 70. So if I look here, I can see that 70 is North America. So one would presume then that this vendor has is a North American vendor. And so I want to make sure that every transaction that is categorized for this vendor, or every transaction that includes this vendor, gets categorized as being a transaction out of North America. Okay, and that's essentially what that's saying. Let's take a look then as we combine that with value posting. Okay, value posting is the next step in that process that looks and says, now what options do I have in terms of control over this dimension? Okay, so if I leave it blank, and I'm just going to set it to blank for a moment, that means that basically as the area code comes in as 70, I don't have any restrictions on value posting. I don't have any restrictions on allowed values. And so any invoice that's going to come in with an area code of 70, and I can change that to be whatever I want if I want, but it's going to come in anyway as a standard, if you will. If I want to change it, I can, but 9 times out of 10, I just want to leave it alone. Value posting goes next layer down in terms of restriction. It says, well, wait a minute, I want to make sure that there are some things that are true about the area dimension, right? As they're true about my dimension codes here. So you have 3 options. Code mandatory. Code mandatory says, basically, I don't much care what area code goes in here, but there has to be one, okay? If you create a purchase invoice off of this vendor, if this is set to code mandatory, and you create a purchase invoice off of this vendor, and then try to remove the default value of 70, it's going to bark at you when you go to post. It's just going to say, I need an area code. It has to have an area code, okay? And then I can go back in and put in 70, or I can put anything I want into that field on the purchase invoice. Second restriction would be same code. Okay, so if it's same code, it basically says, excuse me, area code is going to come in as a default of 70, and it cannot be changed. It has to be 70. You can try to change it, but again, in the posting process, it will come back and bark at you and tell you, no, you cannot do that. Has to be 70. The last one is no code. Now, notice that it barked at me because I did have a code in there. But in this case, you would basically put this, if you said, under no circumstances do I want to have an area code on this vendor's transactions. I absolutely don't want to see that. And so the use of no code will preclude the user from putting anything in there. Okay, so again, you're really layering in some restrictions on what you can and cannot do, what the user can and cannot do on transaction documents. So if we take the default value along with the value posting, so let's suppose that let's turn it back to code mandatory. Let's put our 70 back in here. The allowed values filter gives us the ability to restrict those values. So for example, we have already said that if we pull this vendor into a document, it's going to fill in the area code using the value of 70, and it's going to require an area code regardless of what we do. So if I go in and try to delete the 70, it will bark at me. Okay, fine. But let's put some restrictions on that. All right, so let's select more. I'm going to set disallowed. Okay, 70 is already in there, and it's going to leave 80 in. So that's fine. That's great. So basically, it's saying I can add 70, right? But I also want to use 80 because this vendor may have just opened a facility in South America, and I want to be able to record some transactions as 80, not necessarily 70. And so if you notice, by doing that, we now have a default of 70. In other words, 9 times out of 10, my purchases from this vendor will be from North America. And so I want to code them that way. But once in a while, I'm going to need the ability to code a transaction as being South American. And so what this does is, as I bring this vendor into a purchase invoice, it will stand up 70, and it will allow me to select anything between 70 and 80. So I can pick 70 or 80. And so, again, you have the code, you have the default value, okay, the posting, the value posting restriction, and then the allowed values filter that basically says here are the values that are allowed on this. Now, this type of arrangement can be established for as many dimensions as you want on here. Okay, you don't have to use this at all. That's the kind of the bottom line. You really don't have to use default dimensions, but I think you can see how much value can be added to the data entry. In other words, if I pull in this vendor into a transaction, there is no way that I could ever code this as North American or Northern European, because that value is not even allowed on the document. So let's take a look at it. So we're going to go ahead and save that. We're going to back up. We're going to do new document, purchase invoice, and let's just see how this behaves. Okay. There's Fabricam. Notice that our area code is coming in as a 70. Okay. If I go to change that, and I try to make this Northern European, notice that I cannot use area code 30 for this vendor. It won't post the document. It's only when I go back, select the invoice, change it back to 70. Now if I try to post, just do a post preview here, and nothing, because there's no transactional details, but our error regarding the area code dimension has disappeared. So that's the nickel tour on default dimensions as it relates to vendors, customers, and so forth. But I do want to take a moment and take a look at the chart of accounts, because it's really important here as well. So for example, let's just say I'm going to filter my chart of accounts. I just want to look at the income statement accounts. And I'm going to pick on sale of raw materials. And again, if I go to account, dimensions, you can see that I don't have any restrictions whatsoever. So we're going to put one on here. And again, we're going to pick on area code. And we're going to say code is mandatory. Okay. And then we're going to say that we can use anything other than Northern Europe. Okay, so now it's picked up my allowable values. It's not going to default to anything, but it is going to put a limit on what can be used here, and it's going to put a limit on the fact that it has to be there. So in other words, whenever I post something to account 40110, it will look at the area code and it will accept whatever area code is there as long as it's filled in and it meets this criteria. So you see how that's kind of the flip from what we saw on the vendor card. So the vendor card, we're pulling that into a transaction, and then what it's doing is it's facilitating our data entry in that purchase invoice, kind of gives us some boundaries to work in, create those codes or assign those codes, and then post the document. Now on the flip side, on the receiving end, is the GL account. And now the GL account looks and says, well, wait a minute, yeah, I can select area code, right, that's from that vendor, because the area code fits within the values here. Okay, so you can have it's really two different ways of looking at defaults, right? First one is for giving you the ability to restrict the document being created, and the second one on the GL side, really restricting. It's kind of like the last gatekeeper, that when you go to post something, it's going to come up and say, wait, this doesn't match what I have here in terms of my rule for this GL account. Okay, and so it will fail on the posting and require you to take a look at something like the GL account setup. One last thing I do want to point out on this, and this is a matter of saying, okay, fine, we understand how this works on the vendors and other master records. We also understand how it works within the context of the GL account. But boy, that's a lot of setup, right? And yes, it can be. It can be a lot of setup, and you have to be very careful that you're not getting yourself too wrapped up in it. In terms of making sure that your transactions will flow through properly to the GL. But one way that you can actually simplify some of this, so let's take, for example, we have the income statement, and let's say, for example, that I want to apply a certain set of rules to all of my P&L accounts. And so I can come here to account. So once again, we're on a master record table, GL account table, and we go to the account menu, and we come down to dimensions multiple. And what this is going to do is I'm going to edit the list, and actually I'm going to come back here first. Oops. Select more, and I'm going to filter this list on account type of posting only. It takes all those other ones out of here. So now I'm going to select, I'm going to say account, dimensions multiple, I'm going to edit the list, and I'm going to say department. I'm going to remove this one actually. Oops. I'm going to say department, code mandatory. I need to have, for my budget variance reporting, maybe I need to make sure that there's a department on every single P&L account so that I can make sure that I can do my budget reporting correctly. And so again, using this as the gatekeeper function on the GL account and the GL entry table, I can ensure that every transaction posted to a P&L account will have a department code. I can leave this open, basically to say, I don't care what the department code is, there just has to be one, okay? And so if I come down here and click OK, and now if I just pick open one here, I'm just going to look at this, I come to count, dimensions, and there it is. And we're going to see that being true for every single account in the P&L list. Okay, so it's a really nice way of assigning dimensions and defaults on a larger list, if you will. That's it. So thanks very much for joining in on this. If you like this video, please let us know. If you want to subscribe, please subscribe, and yeah, we'll catch you next time with the next topic. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.